Hey, how's it going, folks? My name is Hellbent, and welcome to the first part in a multi-part little series where we're going to create my take on the Snakes game that I was inspired to do based on the input from one of my subscribers who just recently created a Snake game, and he's created a couple of videos on what he's made in progress with it. So what I'll do to thank him or whatever is I will leave a link in the description to his channel, and you can check out what he's been doing. He's been playing around with a bunch of gaming stuff and a bunch of other things as well. There'll also be two links in the descriptions that you are going to need if you want to follow this step by step. If you watched, which I suggest you do, is if you watched tutorial number 6 where we introduced the Gdip library and using that to alter the script that we had created in episode number 5 and put that into Gdip graphics, you'll know that there was a lot of setup that we had to do to get everything running. So what I've done is I've created a couple of functions that shortcut a bunch of those steps. And in order to use the functions, you're going to need my updated library. So in the description, there's going to be two links. One is going to be to an updated library, and the other link is going to be to the tool that I had released a couple of days ago, where it has a list of all the different functions for the Gdip library built into it, so you can just clipboard them and read over whatever, however you want to do it. But I've updated them with the new functions that I've added. So it'll make, basically, this is it right here. So it's just a list of all the different functions that you can use in the Gdip library. You can select one, right click, and then you can see any information it has about it, as well as clipboard the prototype for the function call, basically, or the full function. So in this, I've included the new functions that we're going to be using today. If you'd like to know how to set it up to add your own functions or whatever, what you'll do, if you're watching this today, it's the last video I made. But if you're watching this a year from now or whatever, you're going to be looking up a video if you want to know how to if you're not sure how to set it up and everything like that, how to run it, whatever. I did a video where I covered how to set it up and everything. And the video you'll be looking for is titled Gdip Functions List Clip Tool. So that's the title of the video. I can see it on my other monitor. So that gives you this. But we're using an updated version of it, which is going to be in the description. So if you got the one the other day, you're going to need this new copy. You can delete the old copy if you want. So this is what we're going to be creating today. Like I said, I was inspired to do a Snakes game, but you know, this is AutoHotkey, so AutoHotkey is all about automating things. So my take on Snakes is where I'm not actually going to be playing it. We're not going to be playing it. But if you want to afterwards, all the necessary code for you to be able to change this into the actual Snakes game is going to be there. So you'll understand with the knowledge that you built up in the past couple of tutorials. If you watched the first couple of tutorials about, you know, controlling something with movement, you know, using your arrow keys, etc., then you just add basically that kind of stuff. And I'll maybe in the next part, if I remember to, I'll actually tell you how I would implement it. But I would use like a queuing system, but I'll try to explain that when we get to it, because I don't actually have it in this. So what this does right now, I can just add in a snake and it goes about its way. It starts off with just being a head, and then gradually over time, certain things that can happen to it, and eventually it can grow into a much larger snake. This is introducing a new thing that we haven't looked at before, which is a grid system for detecting collisions and doing movement. So everything we're going to be doing now is going to be in a grid system. This has a lot of advantages over using a specific X, Y, width, height kind of dimensions to detect collisions. Whereas if we have 100 different snakes or other objects that we're testing for collisions, what we would normally have to do is for each one of our objects or things, player NPCs or whatever, we would have to check against every other object to see if it's colliding, and we'd have to do that for every single thing. With the grid system, what we're going to do instead is we're going to look at the value of a cell. So we don't care about where the other snakes are. We just care about what the values of the cells are, and then we're going to update the values of the cells as those things move around. So we will end up with something like this. My recording software really slows down my computer, so when you run this later on, it'll probably move a little bit faster for you. But now we have all these snakes that can move around, and they know when they're colliding into things. Alright, so this is what we're going to be making. I've already recorded this once before, but I over-explained everything, so I'm going to try to jump through this. And as long as you watch tutorial number 6, nothing's really going to be too difficult for you to follow. So I'm going to try to breeze through this, and if you have any questions, you can always leave a question in the comment. So I'm going to be, because I'm a slow typer, I'm going to use this tool that I created a long time ago that allows me to pre-program what I'm going to talk about, and then I'm just going to let this do the typing for me. Normally I would type out a line, have it type out a line and explain what's going on, but I did that in the last time I recorded this, and it took 45 minutes to get to the end, so I don't want that, so I'm just going to go through this quickly. First thing I'm going to do is set it to single instance force. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach a I'm going to say that when we exit the script, so if we run our script again through the play button, or if we close it some other method than using the GUI or our hotkey, then it's going to launch our GUI close subroutine, which is going to be our exiting out of our script. So no matter how we close our script now, it's going to do our shutdown, because one of the things I forgot to do in tutorial 6 was the cleanup of the memory. So normally when you run an AutoHotkey script, if you allocate memory for like variables, etc., when you shut down the script, it releases that memory. When we're using the Gdip, because it's external to the AutoHotkey, when we shut down AutoHotkey, it doesn't automatically shut down the Gdip. So there was a few things that we didn't shut down. So if you ran it over like 1,000 times, if you ran your script 1,000 times, you'd end up eating up all your memory. It's no problem when you restart your computer, all that memory comes back, all that RAM comes back. But what we'll do in this one is I'll make sure that you have it so that way when you close this, it releases all the memory. Next, we're going to set batch lines to -1, so that way it runs at the top speed. Next, I'm going to include the Gdip library. I put the Gdip library in my library folder, which is in your users, documents, AutoHotkey library folder. So I'm using my Gdip, which like I said, is going to be in the link in the description. So if you want to use my functions, you have to get that copy of it, or you have to get this tool and then include this, whatever you call this tool, include this tool in your line up here. Next, I'm going to create a couple of global variables. I'm going to create an array for a map, which is going to store a multi-dimensional array, which is where we're going to store all the values. So how it's going to work is we're going to create basically a grid, and it's going to be, we're going to separate it based on the size of our screen and a certain dimensions. But we're going to populate it with different values, and depending on what those different values are, we're going to know that our snake can move into it or it can't move into it, etc. Maybe it's food, etc. Next thing, I'm going to create an object called win, and this is going to hold all of our windows and most of our Gdip stuff afterwards. So I created this object called win, and to begin with, I just populate it with a Windows width, and you can adjust this to however you want, and a window height. Next, I'm going to create an array, and I only ended up using this brush thing once because I ended up refactoring my code. I ended up putting it into a class, which we'll go into later. So we didn't actually need this, but because I have it typed out that way, and I'm just going to leave it. The next thing is we're going to create a snake object, which we don't actually need to do, but put a snake object up there. Next is create a variable called counter, set it to 0. And then a variable called color with a U, underscore count. I mean, you can drop the U if you want, but you'll have to do it for every instance of it. And we're setting it to initial value of 2, which will come into play in the next video when we introduce the class. So that's another thing that we're going to be looking at introducing today is classes. Now, I'm no expert on classes. I had to teach classes to myself. And yeah, so Like I don't mean I went and read up on it or anything like that. No, I mean like I literally taught myself how to use classes just by guessing how to do it. So you'll guess how classes are gonna be for me. Not so good. Okay. Next, I'm gonna create another object. This could have been an array, but because I want to be able to, if I want to pick a specific color, by putting it as an object, I have a key that I can put as a number so I can see. So if I want red, let's say if red was the 8th color, instead of me having to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, if I want it to get, well, this is actually blue, right? By putting it in an object, I can put keys beside it, and I'm using just numbers, so I know, okay, there's the thing in my object that has the color blue. So just you can create whatever colors you want. We're going to be using red to begin with, so whatever you pick. So we're going to be using 10 different colors. The code that we're going to have later on is set up for 10 different colors. You can alter it if you need to, but just try to make sure that the first one is red. Well, I mean, you can use whatever you want, but I'm using red because it stands out from all the other colors, and this is going to be the snake's head. So the first color is red. Every other color doesn't really matter. So we're using just RGB, so 6-digit hexadecimal. So the first 2 digits are the red, second 2 digits are the green, last 2 digits are the blue. 10 colors. Next, I'm going to call up a function called createMap, which we're going to create in a little bit. And this is where we're going to populate our multi-dimensional arrays or our grid with their starting values. So we're going to create a border that goes around the screen with a specific value to let the snakes know not to go past that line. And we're going to populate the rest with another value that says you're free to move wherever you want. Next thing I'm going to do is this part is going to be I was made aware that some people, depending on what version of Windows you have, or maybe what version of AutoHotkey you have, I don't really know, but perhaps some of you might not be able to use the option parent. So see how I have plus always on top? There's another option you can use called plus parent, and then you give it the name of the parent window. So I was made aware that maybe some of you might not be able to do that. So at the end of the video, I'm going to show you a way around that so you don't have to use the parent. But for now, I'm going to assume that you all can, so you can follow along. So I'm going to create this is just going to be the parent window that my transparent or layered window is going to sit inside of. So this just gives me the ability to click on the top and move it around, minimize, close the window, etc. Because in other words, we're not going to have that option. But I'll show you, like I said, at the end of the video, I'll show you a way around. I'm going to set its background to black, and I'm going to show it. I'm going to show it at width, height, window height. You can give it any name you want. It's irrelevant. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call one of the custom functions that I created. This is going to deal with most of the setup, including creating that second window. And we're going to pass it a couple of arguments. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set its return value to be our window object that we created up here. So whatever it returns, it's going to be dumped into this Windows object. If I come over here, we can actually see what this function is doing. It's going to set the Windows width, height to whatever we set it to. It's going to, most of this stuff is just we're going to type into it, but the options, it's going to pass the token, the Gdip startup token. It's going to pass to another function that I created to actually create our window, so we don't have to do that. It's going to get the it's going to pass the handle to that window. The H is going to set up the create div section, create HDC, blah, 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 blah. So it does all that stuff that we had to do manually before, as well as later on for shutdown, I have another function that I've created to do all of our shutdown for us. So like I said, you need, if you want to follow along, unless you know how to find this stuff yourself, you're going to need the updated functions in the Gdip library that's in the description. So what we're going to do is we're going to, like I said, we're going to pass it this Windows object to this function Windows layered Windows setup. The first option we're going to pass is the smoothing of the graphics. So this is anti-aliasing for number 4. If you want, you can set it to 1, 0. I think it's 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Right? And you can play around with that. You can run it multiple times to see which one you want. Next thing we're going to do is pass it the Windows X, the Windows Y, the Windows width and height, which we've already set up here, and the name of the window. Because this window here is named 1, we're going to be setting this window's name to window 2. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to pass it a couple of options inside of quotes. The first option we're going to pass it is parent 1. So we're going to set this window to be its parent. What that means is it's going to be a window that sits inside of that other window. So our layered window is going to sit inside of this window. And if we move this window around, this window is going to follow it along. Another one that we're going to pass into it, just so that way we don't get the rounding effect of the other way, that is we're going to remove the caption. Minus caption. All the other options are already set up, so the other two options that it has by default are last found and to make it a layered window, the hexadecimal code to make it a layered window. All the other ones are the ones that we're going to be passing to it. You don't need to set it always on top unless you're going to be doing it the way we're going to be doing it at the end. So maybe if you want, put always on top in here as well. It's not going to do anything with this current configuration, and to show that, I'll do that anyways. Okay, moving on. That's our options. That's it. So this is all of our window setup. Next, I'm going to create a brush, and I'm going to push onto, this is the brush array that we created, and later on I didn't end up really using it as much as I thought I was going to, but we're going to push onto it into its first position a new brush, which is one of the functions that I've created, and I've set it up so that way all this brush is doing is it does the exact same thing as the normal Gdip function create rectangle. In fact, it just calls up that function. So normally you'd have to type out Gdip underscore brush create solid and then pass it a hexadecimal code with 0x, the alpha, and then the color. I've set it up so that way I don't have to type out as long of a name. I've made it a name that I can remember a lot easier, and the only thing you actually have to pass it is the 6-digit hex code for the RGB. Simple, right? Much simpler than having to type out 0xFF222222. In fact, we're going to change this to black. So let's do this 000000. So it's much easier this way. So we're going to create a brush that's black. This is going to be our background. And then we're going to do is we're going to set up the layered window. So we're going to update the layered window. No? Oh, sorry. Now we're going to use that brush with another function that I created called fill box. And fill box is a one-to-one exact thing as the Gdip fill rectangle function. It's exactly the same function. There's been no changes other than fill box is easier for me to remember. We're going to pass it the graphics, our Windows graphics. We're going to pass it the brush that we just created here, which is brush 1. And we're going to pass it the X, the Y, the Windows width, and window height. These are all in the functions tool. So all these functions that I'm calling, they're all up near the top. So fill box, for example, when I want to do that, call that, instead of typing it out, you guys, you can just clip it, paste it in, and then edit the thing. So this would P graphics, you change to Windows WinG. This would be brush 1. This would be 0, 0, Windows width, Windows height. Right? Same with all the other functions. They're all in here. You can just clip them, paste it in, and edit it. So we're going to fill the background of our layered window with this black brush that we created, and now we're going to update the layered window. Update layered window, which is, once again, it's a function you can find right here. So you can just clip that, paste it, and then edit it. So what we're going to be passing to it is the Windows handle, Windows.WinHandle, then win.hdc, the win x, win y, win w, win height. Done. Next thing we're going to do, I believe, is set up our timer. So that way our game loop timer. So there we go. Set up timer, game loop 30 milliseconds. And then return. Now we're going to set it up so that way we can exit, do all of our GUI close, GUI escape, my exit hotkey, which you don't have to use, but I like to have an emergency exit, and then all of our cleanup. So GUI close, GUI escape, my hotkey, and then layered window shutdown, which is a function that I created. We're going to pass it the Windows object. If I look at what that function does, it does this stuff here. So it shuts down all of our stuff. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to take our brush. We're going to delete our brush, which is, I don't remember the name of that. Here we go. Gdip delete brush. This is a function I need to eventually change the name of because I haven't changed it yet. Gdip delete brush, and which brush are we going to be deleting? We're going to be deleting the only brush that we've added to our array. So it's brush number 1, because it's the only one we're going to have. And then we can exit app. I like to have my indentation a little bit different, so I'm going to tab these over. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our game loop subroutine. Game loop. Inside of it, all we're going to do is each time it runs through our game loop, we're going to paint our background black again, and then we're going to update the layered window. So fill box. So once again, we're calling this fill box, which is my function, which is basically gdip fill rectangle. Pass the Windows graphics, the brush, the X, Y, width, and height. So we're filling the whole background black every frame. And then we're going to update the window, except this time we only pass it the handle and the HDC. We don't have to pass it the width and height. X, Y, width, and height. And for now, that's all we're going to be doing inside of our game loop until we create our snake class in the next video. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of hotkeys that we're going to use later on for adding our snakes and maybe making them grow, etc., etc. They're optional. Number pad 1 I've set it up as, and return. So it's not going to do anything right now. It's a blank one. Same with number pad 2, and you can change these to whatever you want if you don't want to use number pad 1 and 2. The next thing we're going to do is I believe we're going to create our create map function. Yes. Inside of our map function, what we're going to do is we're going to take the Windows width and the Windows height, and based on the size of the snake, now I've decided that my snake is going to have little squares or segments that are 10 pixels by 10 pixels. So depending on how you want to alter it, you'd have to alter this code a little bit. I would suggest at least starting with the 10 by 10, and then once you get through the end of the program, then you can work out how you would change all the code to do it the other way. So I'm going to create a variable that is going to take the Windows width and height and divide it by the number of pixels that each segment's going to have. And I'm going to use that to tell me how many times I'm going to loop inside of a nested loop that's going to create the array, the multi-dimensional array, which is going to be our grid that holds the numbered values for where the snake is, where the walls are, where open space is, perhaps food, where food is, etc. So I'm going to say y loop equals the Windows height floor divided by 10. 10 is the width, the size of my snake segments. X loop equals the Windows width floor divided by 10. And then I'm going to create a variable called y and set its initial value to 1. And this is how we're going to loop through our multi-dimensional array. We're going to set up our loop, and we're going to loop y loop times. So if our Windows height was 100 pixels, this loop would be 10. If it's 1,000 pixels, this loop would be 100, etc., etc. So this is our outer loop, our y-axis. So this is our y-axis. And then inside of our y-axis, for every stop along our y-axis, we're going to do all of our x-axis. And then we're going to jump back, drop down, do all of our x. Drop back, down, do all of our x, etc., etc. Immediately inside of the y loop, we're going to create a x variable and set its value to 1. And each time our x loop is finished, when it comes back up to the top, it's going to reset x back to 1. So that way we get, so this is x1, x2, x3, x4, x5, x10, drop back, x equals 1 again. x1, but y equals 2 now. y2, x1, y2, x2. y2, x3, y2, x4, etc., etc. Then we're going to go into our x loop. So this is the width of our game. So how many grid spaces is our width? So if our window was 100 pixels, it's going to be 10 times. If it's 1,000 pixels, it's going to be 100 times. Inside of our X loop is where we're going to do all of our tests. So what we're going to do in here is we're just going to check to see if we're along this border here of our window, along this border here of our window. So are we on the left side of our window, the right side of our window, or if we're at the top of our window or the bottom of our window. If we are, we're going to populate it so that way we have a border, an exclusion zone, so that way our snake knows not to leave our map. So we're going to populate it with a value that if our snake sees, it's not going to pass it. So we're going to say if y equals 1, so this is our y-axis. If y equals 1, that's our top of our screen, so all of these values here, y will equal 1, populate it with a border. Or if y equals the bottom of our screen, populate it with a value. Or if x equals 1, which is this side here, populate it with a value. Or if x is the maximum, populate it with a value. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take our map array and we're going to say map y comma x. So we're creating a multi-dimensional array. So it's basically two arrays. One array holds the y, the other holds the x. You might see a lot of other people, they'll reverse this order. They'll usually start with the X and the Y. I come from a background in C programming on consoles, and if I want to create something on a console, I have to start from the top left side of the screen, and I have to go all the way across, add anything, down one line, add anything, down one line, add anything. In AutoHotkey or lots of other kind of platforms or whatever, you can go in any order you want. I can put something here, and then after I've added this thing, I can put something up here, and then I can add something over here, and then I can add something over here. In the console, when I was creating console applications in C, you can't do that. You start at the top. If you don't add it up here, by the time you get down here, it's too late. You can't add it. You have to refresh the whole screen again and then add it. So this is how I learned how to code. So that's why I like to use Y first. So it's the map array begins with Y and then X. So we start with the Y, 1, X1, X2, X3, X4, so on. So if we're on the border, populate that cell with a 1. In other words, populate that array in that position with a 0. And then later on, we're going to have our snake check what the values of those are. As soon as we're done that, we're going to increment our X variable up 1. And our loop is this X loop is going to start again. So now, this second time, X is going to equal 2. So it's going to check. If it's this, no, add zeros to it. And it's going to do that however many times. And then, once it's out of here, it's going to reset x back to having a value of 1. So let's say if our x loop was 10, by the time we're done with this loop, x would have equaled 10. Now that we're out of this loop, we're back in the outer loop. It's going to reset x back to 1, but we're going to take our y variable and increment it to 2. So all of this inner stuff was our first line. Then we're done. We're going to jump back out of that loop, and we're going to go down to the next line. And then the next line. So immediately, as soon as we're done with these 10 loops or 100 loops, we're going to take our y variable and we're going to add 1 to it. So it was 1, now it's 2. And then it's going to come back in here and fill up our x positions. And then I think we are done. Okay, that concludes everything there. If you do not need to, okay, so go ahead and run it. And we have an error. We're missing something. Which line? Line 18. On line 18, push new brush is supposed to have a closing parentheses. Okay, so that's it, because it's inside of a function, or rather it's inside of push. So push new brush. Okay, now it should work. Okay, so if you don't have an error anymore, if you typed out everything exactly and for whatever reason it says you can't use the parent, or that the options line with the code that says EX whatever, if you're getting an error with that line, then what you can do is, this is the options for you. If you don't get that, I'll see you guys on the next video. Everyone else, if you get that error, stick around. What we're going to do is we're going to take this window here and we're going to get rid of it. So I'm going to comment that out. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to change this from being window 2 to being window 1. Then we're going to take this thing that says parent, we're going to get rid of it, and everything else is going to be the same. So all we've done now is we've said that there is no window 1. This window is going to be all on its own. So what we're going to do is, if you know how to set it up so that way you could use the first window as the owner, and then if you know how to look at the Windows message and how to move this second window along with that first one, like if you know how to set all that up, go ahead. If you don't, we're going to do something as a substitute. It's not going to be pretty, but it's going to do what we need it to do, which is just to move the window around. So what we're going to do is, as soon as we finish calling this layered window setup, this is when it's going to create our second window. What we're going to do is, under that, we're going to do GUI, and as long as you change the name to 1 here, we're going to do GUI 1 add text. So we're going to add a text control. We're going to set it to X0, Y0. Also with the X and the Y, just don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So I'm going to set X0, Y0. Now, I don't know how big you're going to make your window. So what we're going to do is we're going to make our text control really, really big. We're going to say its width is 2,000 pixels and its height is 2,000 pixels. And then all we're going to do is we're just going to attach this to a label called move_window. And that's it. We're not going to put any text on it because you wouldn't be able to see it anyways. So we're going to take this move window and we're going to create a label. We'll create this right underneath our GUI close label. We'll return right away, and then we'll fill in the code. The code that we're going to do is we're going to post a message that's basically duplicating what you would normally post when you click on this. So we're going to make it so you can do this. So in our move window label, we're going to say post message. And then the message we're going to post is 0xa1, 2. Save, run, and now you have this window, but if you click anywhere on it, you can click it and move it around. Sometimes it's a little bit fussy with the Gdip stuff on it, so you might have to double click to get it to engage it, but for me it's been pretty cooperative, right? And now because we've set it up with GUI escape, to exit this window, all you have to do is just select it, press escape, and that'll close your program. Or you can use your emergency hotkey. But you can run it, You can move your window. If you want to minimize it, you just click the button at the bottom of your screen. If you want to move it, if you want to escape, done. Boom. That's it. So that concludes this video. I'll see you guys on the next one, which is where we're going to create our class for our snake. Peace.